Okay, so congrats to both teams making it to the finals. So I don't know what the sides for your teams are. So which one is defending proposition? Bežigrad Magenta or Bežigrad Purple?
The magenta. Magenta is prop.
Okay, so Digital Magenta is on proposition, and on opposition we have Team Bežigrad Purple, if I'm not mistaken. So best of luck to both teams. You already know the rules. So unless there are any other questions, I am inviting the first proposition speaker to open the case for their side. Here.
Can you hear me? Verbal POIs, please. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. To a person that just lost their job, the side of opposition would say, be happy, it could be worse. To a woman in an abusive relationship, they would suggest that she is the problem because she cannot find happiness in it. To a young teenage boy with severe depression, they would tell to suppress the negative emotions and to just think positive. But even to an average individual who might just be sad about a breakup or failing an exam, they would say that there is nothing bad in the world and they should just smile. Two fundamentally important things in first prop. Firstly, some contextualization and groundwork for this debate. And secondly, the first two constructives from our side of the house. One, talking about how the culture of positivity harms your ability to identify the problems. And two, how it disables you from being happy. Hannah, in second, will talk to you about the societal perception of mental health. Firstly, we believe that the culture of positivity does three major things. A, it presumes that the general solution to your problems is to stay happy. B, it creates a belief that the end goal of solving the problems is to be satisfied with the current situation, hence it does not necessitate change. And C, it presumes that people have the ability to control their emotions. Secondly, what does the trend of the culture of positivity look like? This is a prominent part of our society and has been like that for a long time. We see it as part of everything from ancient hedonism to modern self-help books. What this means is that it is manifest in all of the different cultures, in languages, narratives, and so on, and we're all impacted by it. There are different forms of it, from very obvious one when someone literally tells you don't be sad, and from simply our words in our languages having negative connotations when we're describing the negative emotions. Note that this means that every single individual is affected by the culture of positivity. Some are more impacted by it when they're buying crystals or meditating, and some are a lot less impacted by it when they're simply being ashamed of dealing with negative emotions or simply being ashamed of being emotionally vulnerable. Either way, the notion of the culture of positivity and presumes that the best way of dealing with the problems is that to simply be happy about it. And we see this is something we can regret. No, thank you. Thirdly, just to make our stance very clear, we do not regret the idea of being positive in itself. We regret the idea that the cultural presumption of solving your problem through positivity is the best and the only way to deal with your problems. We would prefer a world where solutions to your problems would be different, where you simply wouldn't be blindly positive, but people would be employing different metrics to different situations. Meaning, if you lose a job, you're going to try to get it. If you're depressed, you're going to go see a therapist. The principle for opposition, therefore, is to show us that the best and the only way in the large majority of cases to deal with things is to just be positive. They cannot mitigate that or cherry pick examples. First argument then, talking about how we deal with problems better. The thesis of the argument is that the culture of positivity takes away your ability to identify the problems in real life. This argument will show to you how the culture of positivity disables you from realizing that there is actually a problem that you need to solve. Reasons for why you're being unhappy vary from situation to situation. They could either be external factors like your family not being supportive of your decisions, or your boss making you hate Mondays, or your supposedly friend trying to tell you that you're not good enough at something that you love doing. Or B, they can be internal reasons such as traumas that are caused by violence or serious accidents, or chemical imbalances as example of like lack of certain chemicals. The fact is that in all of those cases, you need something else. You just don't need someone telling you to just stay positive. For a lack of like some chemicals, you need to be treated with medication. For traumas, you also need to be treated with like medications because it changes your brain, and also with therapy because you have to talk to someone about this. In case of like external factors, you need to identify the core of the problem, either quit the workplace or get out of a toxic relationship or try to fix what actually the problem is. The existence of the culture of positivity disables you from doing so because it creates a smokescreen for the actual problem, because it makes you feel that the problem is actually in you because you're not able to be happy in this situation. No, thank you. Everyone, like, meaning that everyone around you is happy and everyone around you keeps telling you that you should be happy, meaning you simply don't identify the core of the problem and you don't find an adequate solutions. There are three major impacts of this. Firstly, people are going to be feeling more unhappy on their side of the house with the culture of positivity existing, as they put a lot of blame on themselves. But secondly, even if they believe that they're going to be happy to a certain extent, they're not going to identify the actual problems, meaning they're going to stay in the toxic environment, stay in the toxic relationship, which is bad in itself. But thirdly, know that this also applies to a larger society, because people are not going to, in a second, because people are not going to be identifying the real problems and are not going to be getting angry over injustices. We believe that this is good because this is how you actually achieve change. But they're on their side of the house, they're going to be looking at the bright side of things. They're going to be trying to find the bright side of being compressed. This is something we absolutely don't want on our side of the house. Laura, go.
We're from the side of opposition, recognizing that happiness is the ultimate goal of the society and of the individual. What on-side opposition prevents you from thinking about things that prevent you from being happy?
You're thinking about things that make you feel unhappy because you're identifying the core of the issue, meaning at the end of the day, you're being able to be happy far more because at the end of the day, you're being able to suppress those negative states and think about the solutions to your problems and identify the cause of the issue. Second argument then, talking about how the culture of positivity disables you from being happy. The mental status in the culture of positivity is that the positivity is within your control, because the phrases like just be positive and stay happy presume that the situation is within your control and that you are able to change it. This automatically means that people who are depressed are ashamed of themselves because it presupposes they should be happy and have the ability to achieve the constant state of happiness. But as explained earlier, this is simply not possible for a large majority of people. However, the societal perception of negative feelings further stigmatizes them and creates and perpetuates individuals' beliefs that they must be happy at all costs. This leads to two major things. Firstly, you simply suppress your emotions, which can cause stress, negatively impacts your memory, and simply exaggerates your mental health problems, which is something that is bad for you as an individual. But secondly, and more importantly, it makes you misunderstand what happiness is because you never actually felt it. You think that happiness is within your control, hence you think that you achieved it with the suppression of the feelings, because the culture of positivity tells you that if you suppress your negative feelings, you're going to be feeling happy, meaning you suppress your negative feelings which harm you, but you're going to still be feeling unhappy, but you're going to substitute that and think that this is happiness and this is what happiness should feel like. Therefore, you're going to have nothing to compare it to, nothing to strive for, and you think simply feel like the sorrowful state is the state of happiness. This argument shows to you the unique harms we get with the existence of the culture of positivity. This is why I'm very proud to propose this motion.
I thank Anna for a fine speech, and I'm inviting the first opposition speaker to open the case for their side. Here.
Am I audible? Okay. If so, I would like to please address my POIs verbally, and I'm going to begin in 3, 2, 1. Set of proposition grossly mischaracterizes what we support under the notion of culture of positivity. I will elaborate on this later within my rebuttal. 3 things in first op. Firstly, general rebuttal on their case, later rebuttal on their argument, and then moving on to our very own framing, characterization, and presenting to you our constructive arguments that talk about how it gives you motivation to move on and ultimately achieve societal change, which is also the argument which will have integrated rebuttal to their point about hate leading to social justice movements. Let's start off with general rebuttal. They tell you that what do we give to a person that just lost his job? We tell you, to a person who just lost his job, we would give an escape from this loss. To a woman in an abusive relationship, we would give hope to a better future. To a teenage boy with depression, we would give a greater purpose in life to continue living and striving for. Furthermore, on the point of gross mischaracterization, they tell you that what we must support is telling everyone to be happy despite how problematic their current situations are. This is simply not true. What we mean under the culture of positivity is that we discourage negative emotions and we encourage happiness. However, we do so by not telling a person to be happy with his status quo and fully content with it, rather by finding the positives which will keep you going and striving towards a better future, ultimately to achieve full happiness, which we recognize as the final goal of society. Proposition cannot push the burden for us to defend complete feeling of happiness and content with status quo. We're still able to feel discontent. Rather, we focus on the positive aspects as we strive to a better life for ourselves. Firstly, let us from that move on to their negation on the first argument. They tell you that we don't give solution to real life problems. First of note that argument stands at the point at which their characterization does. Because if characterize how it is unfair and unjust that they frame it in such a way, the argument falls on its very own. Because on our side of the house, we still have people that are striving towards a better life, that are striving towards a better goal. Rather, on the comparative, however, we give said people motivation. We give said people a reason to continuously strive for said better future. Whereas side of proposition indulges those people in misery from them acknowledging and not having hope in a greater status, further elaborated in our first constructive argument. We give them hope, all while motivating them to continuously strive to future advances and to future improvement of their situation. Next up on their point of societies. We tell you that negativity results in riots. Negativity results in protests such as the Capitol Hill protests against the stolen elections from the side of President Trump. However, constructive understanding of how problematic the current situation is and hope for a better future is what results in actually constructive protests that lead to something, because ultimately rebellions and protests are built on hope. However, there will be more negation in this integrated in our further constructives. Let's start off with the framing that we bring from the side of opposition. We tell you that we still support the treatment of medically caused mental health disorders because there is a medical disorder rather than a negative emotion that must be suppressed. There is a core distinction between having a physical disease rather than having negative emotions. In the same way as we support the treatment of cancer, we support the treatment of depression that is caused by a chemical imbalance within your brain. We also support diagnosis and education on such medical disorders, and that is to say it is actually better on our side of the house at the point at which the norm is set as being happy. A person that actively sees that he's unable to be happy is likely to seek out medical support from the side of professionals because he is able to identify that he's unable to actually improve himself on his own. No, thank you. Lastly, we recognize happiness as the ultimate goal, and we must do everything to achieve it, which both includes working on ourselves and the people surrounding us within our community, because at the end of the day, culture of positivity teaches us that happiness is the end goal of society that we should achieve. Lastly, an important distinction to be made before we move on to our arguments is that bullying is heavily discouraged on our side, just like any other negative emotion. We support the discouragement of emotions, while negative emotions, while encouraging positivity. However, not by making fun and degrading the person, rather by giving him constructive analysis to why that is problematic and highlighting out why being sad is a problem, while not degrading the person to the extent of said person having more depression due to our very own actions. Next up, what are the burdens in this debate? Our burden of proof is to show to you why the culture of positivity is beneficial to communities, as to why it is good that it has existed. But secondly, their burden of proof in the debate is to show to us why it is so problematic that our world would have been better if it were never to exist at all, and why without the culture of positivity exclusively do they achieve a better status quo and a better world as a whole. Without further ado, let's move on to our first constructive, which talks about how it gives a new meaning of life without God existing. Look, in the past, religion and God was created as an escape from people's mundane daily lives where they face multiple struggles. With more and more people becoming atheists, this has become highly problematic as people don't have something to turn to. Furthermore, certain communities simply cannot be religious because they are, by the very definition, discriminated against by said religions, such as certain minorities. What does this mean? This means that those people have nowhere to turn to when times get tough, hence it's leading to problems within said people with motivation continuously moving forwards. What does this mean? That means with the culture of positivity exclusively, they get a higher purpose to believe into something that brighter times will come, and to find the benefit in status quo, all while staying sane to be motivated to work for the future, which will be our second construct. Right? What are the impacts of this? The impacts of this argument is that that minorities especially have now encouragement to continuously move forward. And this is alone enough to win us the debate, because we show the necessity of culture of positivity in status quo as religion is fading away, specifically for the already disenfranchised communities such as minorities and the LGBTQ+ community. Let's move on to our second constructive that tells it helps us reach a better world. Motivation is crucial to achieve something, and motivation comes from bright dreams. What we support the motivation, and we support the shift in society's perception of happiness. We want our society to recognize happiness as the end goal of everyone, which should be achieved at all costs, right? What does this tell us? This tells us that it has two impacts. First off, on a personal level. On a personal level, you must work through your struggles with motivation, continuously fighting for a greater purpose. As previously explained in rebuttal, this is solely possible to the point where you're motivated to do anything. But secondly, we cause a shift in societal ideals, which makes people more likely to be happy as those surrounding them are together working to make said person happy, because through the culture of positivity, they want to achieve the common goal of happiness. Lastly, on civil movements, as already previously stated in my rebuttal, you need hope for achievement of civil movements. Hope is solely possible by finding the beneficial and good things in status quo, relying on those things to get you through the hard times, all while fighting for the light that is to come at the end of the tunnel. At the end of my speech, I've shown to you why firstly, you vote for our side because we exclusively benefit minorities in their tough times. And secondly, why we give people more motivation, not only to get there from mundane daily life circumstances, but also why we achieve constructive change for better in our society. Never been prouder to oppose.
I thank the first opposition speaker for his fine speech, and we're moving on to second speeches of this debate. And second speaker, opposition, the floor is yours.
Just a second. I have a, yeah. On the side of opposition, you give to the boy who is in an abusive household hope, positivity, as they try to represent. But what does that mean? That means that this little boy will have hope that his family will suddenly not be abusive anymore. That maybe in the future they will change, that maybe in the future they may love him, they may actually accept him. And that's the problem of the style of opposition, because that's not going to happen. What's going to actually happen is the abuse is going to continue. This boy needs to get out of that family, and this boy is not supposed to suppress the negative emotions that he has against the family. This boy is supposed to fight against the system, and fight against his family in this case, and go get out, because it's dangerous. It's also very, very harmful for him emotionally, and it's actually destroying his happiness. What I'm going to do in my speech is I'm going to firstly go through the general negation, and then I'm going to talk about my third argument, which is this positivity culture disables mental health awareness and also the development in the field itself. Firstly, let's talk about what this actually positivity culture is. Look, on the side of opposition, they try to tell us, look, the positivity culture is you looking on the things from the positive outlook, and that's it. No negative suppression of emotions and stuff like that. But what they have to realize is that the suppression of emotions happen on the side of opposition, and they have to deal with that, and they have to fight under that. Look, what they have to realize is that this is actually bringing people for not actually solving the problems at the core. People actually suppressing these emotions and not actually dealing with this stuff. And they have to deal on that basis. But secondly, okay, let's take the characterization. Look, what happens on that side of the house is that they're blindly looking for a goal. They have this blind goal of happiness, which they just have from their society influence and saying you are supposed to follow this goal. Look, this is not the point. The point is that you're supposed to, like, for example, be able to find your own goal, because now you're actually able to strive for that goal. What happens on the side of opposition is this blind goal is just there. This like abstract idea of just be happy. No, thank you. Look, what does this mean is that they're not capable of actually striving for these things. But secondly, what even Anna tells you in her speech is many times when people are, for example, depressed, when people don't know what's going on, they don't even know what this happiness is. On the side of opposition, what happens is these people are being told, yeah, just be happy, just be happy. And if they're, for example, in their formative years, depressed and stuff like that, they're going to think, oh, okay, this is happiness. This is happiness right now, what I'm living right now. But this is not the case. People are supposed to be told, look, you have to find the meaning of yourself. Look, and this is also something that ties with their first argument, I think. This ridiculous argument about how we need some sort of new religion because you're atheist and you're incapable of finding your purpose. Look, guys, what we have to realize is that people are atheists because people want to find their purpose of life, not because it's contingent on some higher being, but what they actually want is to find something that they're able to resonate and something they're able to function through. What happens on the side of opposition is they just tell you, yeah, well, here you go, we give you another purpose. Look, what we tell you is, yes, of course, people can have the purpose of being, for example, positive if they want to do that. But what we tell you is we give them an option. We give them many different mechanisms. And this is something that Anna even talks in her speech. We give them many different mechanisms through which you're able to gather and work through your problems, not only through positivity, but also you, for example, have the ability to go to a psychiatrist and do certain things, because this is not a prevalent and like big idea in the side or in the world, that in the status quo of this sort of society. Secondly, let's talk about the individual and like where is it better for the individual. No, thank you, David. Look, what we have to realize is that, as I told you before, we don't even know what happens in the case when you don't even know what true happiness is. But secondly, they try to talk about like, oh, look, now you're positive, now you want to strive, and now you want to find and like solve your problems that you have in the current society. But look, what happens is that firstly, this is a very, very bad society, because this society wants from you to be positive. This society wants for you to be positive, and at the point of which you're not, well, that's a bit bad for you, ain't it? Because what happens is you're ashamed of actually coming out and telling that you are sad. It's bad for you to do these certain things, because this is not something that is accepted. This is not something that people want from you, and therefore you're ashamed. But secondly, even if you do come out, even if you want to talk about your problems, what happens is that they just tell you, as they told my schoolmate in school, they told them that what happens is, well, just work more, you're depressed, your internal investigation just has to be done. Well, that's it. But look, that's not the problem. The problem is that you have to actually deal with certain aspects, and you have to deal with that, and this is what the side of propositions give you, and this is what happens. So lastly, let's talk about this action. Look, when they come here and try to talk about, yeah, well, the actions are built on hope and stuff like that. Look, that is absolutely not true. The action is built on the anger about of the system, on the anger that is actually going to, on the bias and prejudices that is going on in the system. People want to fight it, and that's why they fight against the system, because they're angry. What happens uniquely on the side of opposition is, yes, they are happy. What does this mean? That they're satisfied with what's going on in the system. That's why they don't have this big incentive to actually fight, to actually strive as they want to present. No, thank you. And this is the problem that we're remarking here. But now let's talk about my third argument, which is that positivity culture disables mental health awareness and development of the field. Look, the characterization. What is the perception of mental status in the culture of positivity? Mental status in the culture of positivity is within your control, meaning you have the agency over your own feelings. You can just will yourself to be happy. But clearly, humans have subconscious, which is not within our control. We cannot just change our brain structure if it's not okay. Chemicals in your brain are not okay. Some base ground beliefs are, for example, traumatizing you or some stuff like that. Due to people believing everything can be solved through a culture of positivity or just changing something in your life, the science and like people's perception is not something that you can actually solve if you're, for example, unhappy, because people can just say, well, it's actually not dealing with that. What are the impacts of that? What are the mechanisms behind it? First of all, we tell you that this is seen as a waste of time. People just don't go into the medicinal fields dealing with psychology and stuff like that, because just don't think that this is something that's going to be solved. But secondly, even if people go into studying psychology, we see that they are can be biased. For example, in the 70s, when culture of positivity was very prevalent, what happened is that, for example, this autism was just presented as a big disease, incapable of actually being solved. And this is the problem, because this is actually something that can be, for example, helped through different treatments. But this is not something that happens on the side of opposition, where this is not even seen as a legitimate disease. But thirdly, what we tell you is that less awareness means also less money going into these sort of fields. What does this mean? For example, even the researches cannot happen at the same extent as could on the side of proposition, where this is seen as a legitimate thing. And what does this also mean is that, for example, psychologists in schools or certain fields like that are not as prevalent. Why? Because the state and people just don't have enough money to actually give money and actually employ them, because, well, as the opposition would say, it's, well, useless to some extent. Just be happy. Thank you.
I thank Hannah for her fine speech, and we're moving on to the second speech of opposition. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like visual POIs, if that's possible. Thank you. And my speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, we believe that from the side opposition to the side proposition, there has been a fundamental misunderstanding of firstly our model and what we provide for those depressed and those in unlikely situations over which they have no control over. They completely mischaracterize our arguments. But firstly, I'll go through rebuttal. Secondly, I will reestablish arguments. And finally, I'll present a third and final argument, that being how on side proposition, through glorification of mental disorders, we actually hurt those they are trying to protect, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, side proposition brought out the example of the little boy who is being abused. Firstly, this also ties in later, but they completely mischaracterized our argument of the meaning of God. We are not saying that we are providing some new religion that atheists can join. No, we are saying that we simply acknowledge that there are circumstances out of your control over which you have no possible way of changing. And on side proposition and on side opposition, these circumstances still occur. The little boy is still abused. So at our worst, it's a wash. But on our best, we give the boy something to strive towards, happiness in the future, some meaning aside from beatings of death of his father and his mother. Secondly, they stated that people are not actively dealing with emotion on our side of the house, though we have already expressed how on our side of the house, the general aim of our society is to get better. Hence, people are going to be actively encouraged to think about why are they not being happy? I should be happy. I will change something to be happy. No, this does not apply to mental disorders, which I will address later. Thirdly, they state that abuse is negative. I would like to say that firstly, on our side of the house, the beating of the child, first off, doesn't even occur. Why? Because beatings of a child, as well as I will say later on in our argument, are examples of negative emotions, hatred, which are generally discouraged in our society, meaning that once it is brought up that the child has been abused, the general society is going to gather around the child and help him out of the circumstances, because we recognize that the general goal of the society is to be better. No, thank you. Now, let's continue onto a second mischaracterization of our arguments. We stated that depression and other medical conditions are what we realize. So, and that they cannot be solved on an individual level. Hence, they need treatment and they need medical attention. And on our side of the house, we already explained why this is more likely to happen. Because the general society sets the bar that happiness is the ultimate goal. And anything below that, and which cannot be brought to happiness, needs to get medical attention. That's why depressed know what happiness is. Because the society generally tells them, if you do not meet these criteria, you are not happy, and you should seek medical attention. Secondly, they stated that the society wants generally people to be happy, and that directly ties into their second point, that being on social movement. They stated that generally revolutionary action and social movements are built on anger, but we already in our first opposition argument provided the example of the MAGA people, who also were born out of despite and resentment, and look what this brought us. On side proposition, by basing our movements on hope and happiness, we generally reach better outcomes. There are two layers to this. Firstly, individual racists and people who are generally prejudiced against other minorities are going to be discouraged. Why? Because being angry towards someone is hatred, and hatred is a negative emotion. On our side of the house, is generally discouraged. And further, by providing people the hope for a better tomorrow, and through society recognizing happiness as the ultimate goal and making strides to make everyone happier, we are also addressing problems on a societal and a systemic level. People are not gonna like racism. Why? Because it makes people sad, it makes people feel repressed, and we want people to be happy on our side of the house. I will take your POI.
Note that you support the status quo, the racist, homophobic, transphobic status quo that you cannot change, where people are still being abused.
Note, in the status quo, we do not have a complete positivity culture. Those feelings, as I've already explained, hatred, homophobia, racism, arise from spite, arise from anger, which our house strictly opposes and your house seems to enable. I will continue on to a third and final argument, that being how through glorification of disorders, the side proposition actually not helps, but only damages those who they wish to protect, those mentally ill with certain conditions. Even if we take the side proposition at their best, that means that on their side of the house, there's going to be a greater availability of communication about the mental illness, and that is achieved. And I've already stated how that is not so, but let's take it on the highest ground. Even though we have one additional problem on their side of the house, that being the glorification of disorders. Without recognizing happiness of an individual as the ultimate goal and everything below that being something we do not want and need to change, people, through being told, are more likely to come out and ascribe mental disorders to themselves, even though they might not suffer from a particular disorder clinically. This leads to everyday usage of conditions such as depression, bipolar, anxiety as simple synonyms, for example, stage fright or being sad. We identify 3 negative ways in which this impacts the minorities the proposition is saying they protect. It diminishes what it truly means to be depressed. Through our everyday usage of term depression, anxiety, and bipolar, for example, we water down what it truly means to be depressed. By waking up sad and stating, I'm depressed today, this makes us, as a society, invalidate depression as a clinical condition that has to be solved on a societal level, which, as I might say, they enable. Secondly, those depressed are not taken as seriously. Why is that? By everyone using the term depressed for everyday circumstances. This culminates in people not being taken seriously when they actually come out and truly are clinically depressed. Why is that so? This is seen when people state such things such as suicidal people just need to get a grip or are just sad. No, thank you. This leads to less urgency when dealing with cases of clinical depression and less treatment on their side of the house, where we recognize depression as suboptimal and a thing that has to be treated medically in order to ensure our ultimate goal, which is happiness of the wider society as well as the individual. And lastly, by people using depression as a common excuse or a synonym for sadness, we make clinically depressed feel alienated and being used as a commodity, or even think their condition isn't as serious as it is. This is seen, for example, in cultural appropriation. With the wider society using parts of your identity, which mind you has to be sold on our side of the house clinically, as a fashion niche, or normalizing it to the point that it means practically all sadness across the board, you make people affected with the condition feel much worse. And lastly, it brings out the general well-being of society. Mr. Speaker, through adopting depression for every circumstance that you might feel sad in, you inadvertently bring down the happiness of the individual as well as the society at large. Why? We already explained how thinking best of any situation helps with feelings of sadness and circumstances which are not under your control. And on side proposition, this remedy is unacceptable. Due to all of the aforementioned reasons, we are proud to oppose. And Mr. Speaker, we implore you to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for your fine speech. And we are moving on to the third speeches of this debate. So first on Jiva, the floor is yours.
Am I audible? Okay. Panel, I find it really funny that their third argument talks about how people aren't being treated fairly or really when they say they're depressed. When literally the culture of positivity, its response to people saying, I am depressed is, well, just don't be. That is literally the definition of what people say in the culture of positivity. And I'm pretty sure that people that are depressed are actually feeling worse because of this, over than the fact that some of their classmates also identify themselves as depressed. Personally, if I was depressed and I wanted everybody to treat me seriously because I'm depressed, I would not only say I'm depressed to other people, I would say I'm clinically depressed and this solves their problem completely. I don't understand how this is even an argument. Let's start with the clashes, but with my speech, I'll firstly go through a clarification of what their actual burden is. Secondly, I'll go through the 3 main clashes of this debate. Firstly, I'll talk about the clash of how people are going to be solving their individual problems. Secondly, I'll talk about the societal change. And lastly, I'll talk about the development of mental health in the individuals that can actually, so we know more about the mental health in this iterate. But first, let's start with the actual characterization of what they have to be defending. Note that they support the status quo. As I've illuminated it throughout my POI, you can't simply say that you support a highlighted magical version of positivity culture, which magically destroys all bigotry. No, thank you. And like just magically destroys racism and transphobia. I'm pretty sure this is not something that you can claim on the side of opposition, even if you put this positivity culture on steroids, because people can still be positive and racist because they can be happy whilst being racist. I don't understand how it works in the first place. Now, what is positivity positivity culture. In general, it is something that makes people wish for a blind satisfaction and rather suppress their emotions. Why is that so? It is because it values positivity over anything else, and it doesn't provide you a way to get to that positivity because it is generalized, because it is meant for everyone. That is to say, it doesn't provide individual solutions to problems. When somebody wishes to be happy and isn't given a mechanism, they're probably going to just take whatever happiness they can get, and they're going to either suppress their emotions or believe that the happiness that they have is the one that they have, and it's not actually happiness, and thus that they're going to be harmed by this action. Now, I will not be negating the argument because I have already done so throughout the introduction. Moving on to the clashes. First clash about identifying the problems that we actually have pointed out. We've said that three main problems cannot simply be solved through being positive. Firstly, we talked about trauma, clinical depression, and lastly, we talked about just in general your situation outside of relationships, etc. No, thank you. And I'm pretty sure all of us agree that we have to change your past trauma in order to survive in a better society. You have to understand your clinical depression in order to be working for the better life. So how does positivity culture disable these things? Two main ways. Firstly, because it aims for blind satisfaction and essentially says that the solution for everything is just to look on the positive side of the situation. That is to say, at the point of which you're in an abusive household, you look on the positive side. At least you are in a house. No, the solution here is not to just be in an abusive household and be happy. The solution here is to call the police, and there's usually that sort of a solution. I'll take you in a second whilst I finish my second point. Second one is essentially the presumption of agency, right? And this is essentially saying that an individual is capable of helping themselves mentally. That is to say, I can be helpful, I can be positive, and thus help myself overcome depression. This is not something that is likely to happen, but you seem to disagree. Avi.
No, we told you that we don't support complete satisfaction with the current situation. Rather, we support seeing the positives. While you're able to fight your way out of said abusive household, you have to have something that keeps you going. Please engage in that analysis.
Listen, positivity culture in general presumes this blind satisfaction because the goal is for you to be satisfied in the first place. If I'm not angry at my parents for being abusive, I'm not going to be calling the police on them for being abusive because at least I'm satisfied with something else. It makes me less likely to call the police on them, and that's harm on itself, even if I sometimes call on the opposition as well. But secondly, let's talk about the presumption of agency, something that has not been negated by the side of opposition. They essentially say that people should not be told that they themselves can solve their mental clinical depressions simply because that is impossible. But then opposition says, oh, but the goal is happiness, so people are at least going to try to be happy and are going to be working towards that goal. But note that there's nuance in this point, at the point at which people themselves, when this positivity culture tells you that whatever happiness is something that you probably have already felt, you can possibly achieve on your own. That is to say, a feeling of satisfaction. Note that the only metric to understand on whether or not something is happiness is from yourself. That is to say, if I, a clinically depressed person, have never felt happiness in my entire life and have only felt disassociation and escapism, I will not understand what true happiness is and will misunderstand what my goal in the first place is. That is to say, when I have panic attacks, I'll see them as misconceptions and I'll simply go for the disassociated version of my life. Two harms that come out of this. Firstly, at best, I live a horrible, bland life in which I don't even understand what I am because I don't associate with my own identity anymore. But secondly, simply because I'm reaping the harm still and I'm never addressing the actual core problems, right? At the end of the day, I'm still having panic attacks. I'm still having those mental breakdowns and I'm never addressing them because I simply see them as the thing that I'm trying to avoid, the thing that I'm trying to suppress. Because my goal is disassociation, because my goal is escapism, I will never be going to the psychologist because I already believe I have achieved that goal. People are depressed and aren't even aware of it. Second clash about societal change. What opposition here claims is that we need hope for the change of things and that people have to have some blind hope. This is incredibly arrogant simply because most of change in the 20th century has been changed due to the fact that people were angry. The Fridays for Future does not happen because people are hopeful, but because people are angry at the corporations. Stonewall was a fucking riot, and just in general, all revolutionaries were violent movements that were angry at the entire community. I don't understand how anything is going to happen. But secondly, what we told you on our side is at the point of which opposition already understands that positivity can bring you some sort of purpose in life, we obviously understand that this disables you from taking that purpose and putting it into social movements and being more angry on a comparison. That is to say, they are not only suppressing anger, but are also making people less likely to be putting their purpose in life into these social movements. Last clash about mental health, which was not addressed by the side of opposition. We essentially say that at the point at which mental health and understanding of it is built on a society that disenfranchises individuals that feel angry, we're not likely to be actually addressing these issues because people aren't going to be talking about these issues. People don't believe that these things are something to be talked about in the first place. Thus, they're less likely to be investing into mental health professionals, mental health facilities, and developing these things and these situations. On a comparison, this means that in a world in which we wouldn't have positive culture, we'd have a better understanding of our mental health psyche, and thus a better understanding of ourselves in the process. Panel, they don't understand what positivity culture is. Please vote side proposition.
I thank Jiva for her fine speech. And now we are moving to the last constructive speech of this debate. Nina, the floor is yours.
Hi, sorry. I would be happy if you addressed your POIs verbally. And other than that, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So I will be the third speaker of the proposition. And first I would ask this: what does side proposition give the boy in an abusive family? The boy who's depressed, the woman in a toxic relationship. We give them hope that things will get better, that they deserve happiness, and we give them strength to fight while you leave them miserable and stuck in the same situation. Side proposition is normalizing sadness while we encourage people to have the goal of happiness. Why shouldn't you want people to be happy? Why shouldn't happiness be the end goal, satisfaction, the end goal that you want to achieve? Why wouldn't you want to strive for a better, happier life? You have completely mischaracterized our side, and you clearly do not understand what the burden of proof on your side is. We are discouraging negative emotions, not ignoring them. We strive for change in order to achieve happiness. What you are doing is putting people in a social cage of misery without providing them of a way to escape it. So I would like to now move on to the first clash, which was on the individual benefits. On our side, we recognize that things are often out of control. We recognize that life sometimes seems random, and instead of being sad, you should focus on the positives and move on, heal from things you cannot change. This is better because people do not dwell on the past, and they actually have more motivation, more hope to achieve their goal. People can move on and not dwell things on outside of their control, and they can stay sane due to culture of positivity. People are surrounded by happiness, and people also wish for others to be happy, which is one of the principles of a culture of positivity that has been stated repeatedly during our speeches. Minorities, for example, often face discrimination, and since they are unable to fix it themselves individually, culture of positivity helps them move on to not focus on the simple-minded individuals that try to hurt them. Rather, culture of positivity gives them hope and the strength to connect with others like them and bring positive social change on a larger scale. So not only are minorities better off, just simple individuals, because society encourages others to be happy and encourages you to encourage others to be happy. Culture of positivity also creates a society who encourages those who have mental illness to seek help. Why? Because they understand that being sad is not a goal. It is not something that you should be feeling, something that you deserve to feel. Culture of positivity gives them a goal to strive for. It gives them it gives them hope that someday they could heal. No, thank you. That someday they could heal and overcome their problems. Culture of positivity disables you from recognizing problem. Culture of positivity enables you to recognize and solve problems. And you are also saying that people will stay in bad situations, but that is simply not true. That falls on your side of the house. Why? Because people are too miserable to actually hope that there is a chance for them to get out of the bad situation. While on our side of the house, we not only recognize the problem, we give the people the hope and the chance to break out of those situations and solve the very problems that are burdening them. Our second clash was on the societal benefits. We promote social change. One of the main clashes was whether or not protests are built on anger or on hope. We simply think that it is on hope. Why? Because you have hope that you can change something. You have hope that you deserve better. You have hope that you can improve your society. Things that are built on anger are destructive. They are violent, and this is not a protest. It is a false protest. It is a riot. Things that bring long-term societal change are built on hope. Why? Because culture of positivity recognizes happiness as a societal value which brings better results on this field. Culture of positivity teaches you that better times will come. This leads to people having hope, having motivation to keep on fighting for what they believe in, for what they think is right. People fight for change despite all odds, despite how hopeless it may seem. They fight for their rights because culture of positivity gives them hope that better days can and will be achieved. Furthermore, culture of positivity causes more social justice movements, which means that this also creates a much more accepting society and long-term benefits to social change. Minorities are also better on our side of the house here. Why? Because there's less discrimination. Why? Because people have the aim of making others happy as well. Again, this is one of the principles that we've established for the culture of positivity. Minorities are much more likely to find support within their communities because their communities, due to the culture of positivity, encourage positivity, happiness, and acceptance. Ultimately, this leads to drastic change towards an accepting society. No, thank you. And we win because we prove that not only individuals, but whole societies change for the better, which means that marginalized groups are better off in our status quo, in our status. I apologize. We create unity through happiness instead of letting negative feelings destroy the fragile piece of society, which brings me to my third and last clash, and that is on the perception and who gets more helpful for mental disorders. We have showed you that greater communication about mental illness wouldn't be achieved, as Laura has mentioned. But even if we take proposition at their highest ground so that greater communication would be achieved, side proposition only causes more problems through glorification of disorders. Why? Because they don't recognize happiness as the best choice. People falsely adopt mental illness as part of their identity, which seems, I don't know, fashionable, popular, whatever it is. Society now uses terms like depression, anxiety disorder, or synonyms as synonyms for a bad day or nervousness. Real clinical medical issues are now devalued, diminished. Depression, for example, no, thank you. Depression, for example, means just being sad and not having a real medical condition. People with such disorders are invalidated and not taken seriously as the terms are used every day. People now associate mental illness with someone just, I don't know, being sad or being dramatic or being nervous. Now, this vulnerable group of mental disorders feels even worse because they now started believing that their problem isn't even serious or real, it's just normal. How are you planning on diagnosing and treating mental disorders if you're normalizing negativity, if you're normalizing them? This means that the perception of disorders has completely shifted from viewing them as a medical issue, as something to be improved, to viewing disorders as everyday, perhaps even okay. This leads to individuals who actually have such issues to not being recognized and not being helped because they don't know that anything is wrong with feeling depressed, as you've also mentioned in your third speech. What we are doing is providing them with an example to what they should strive for, to a better happy life. We have showed you on 3 different levels why we win this debate, and I'm so proud to oppose this motion, because side proposition has clearly mischaracterized and misunderstood the point of this debate to a point to which they are normalizing sadness, while on our side of the house, we are simply recognizing happiness as the ultimate goal of society. Thank you, and I implore you to oppose this motion.
Thank you, Nina, for this fine speech. And we are moving on to replies. Firstly, the opposition reply. The floor is yours.
Am I audible? All right, if it is so, then I'm going to begin the timer and my speech in 3, 2, 1. Side of proposition automatically loses the debate by characterizing our side as a side that must support complete repression of emotion, as a side that must support not treating medical condition as such, and treating us as a side that must support people not being given a goal in life and told to just find happiness completely and content within the status quo that is clearly problematic for said people. This is already enough to lose in the debate. 3 points in my reply. Firstly, clarifications that have to be made, then later on reinstating the burdens of proof, and lastly going on over 3 grounds on which side of opposition takes this debate home. Let's start off by important clarification. Which side gets you medical diagnosis and which side can and cannot support medical diagnosis? We tell you that we are allowed to support medical treatment and diagnosis for 2 reasons. Firstly, medical diseases are not considered negative emotions. They should still be diagnosed and treated. Secondly, by setting the bar at a certain limit of happiness, we are allowing the people not only to be able to find out themselves when they clearly see themselves as problematic, but also by increased education we're allowed to support on our side of the house about those medical issues, we achieve greater ability in that wasn't engaged with and was brought up in first opposition speech. Secondly, what can and cannot we support? We tell you that we're still allowed to support a slightly improved version of culture of positivity because as time passes, logically things are going to improve. But even if we take them at their best and assume that we must support strictly what already exists, we still take this debate later on explained in the 3 questions that this debate should be decided on. Lastly, where is there more diagnosis? As previously stated and down the bench, we have been explaining to you, more diagnosis occurs to the point where it is easier to find which specific people are the ones that face those problems and are unable to solve them on their own. And when there is no misdiagnosis, when there is no glorification of mental disorders, as Laura was explaining to you, was ignored by their side of the house. Now let's move on the 3 grounds in which this debate has fallen to the side of opposition. Firstly, on the point of motivation for people. Look, we've told you from the very beginning that we do not support full content with status quo. We told you that we need motivation to keep going for a better time, because exclusively by being motivated can you actually achieve something at the end of the day. You cannot achieve anything by continuously staying miserable, which is what they advocate for. You can achieve something by having hope and continuously striving, fighting with it. This hasn't been engaged with on their side. All of their negation completely ignores this point brought up from the very beginning of our case. This is already enough to keep our most important argument standing. However, furthermore, we also told you that we have increased medical diagnosis, and at best they managed to end up make this point being a wash. Ujiva telling us in her speech that no, they're still going to have medical diagnosis, that on our side we're not going to be able to identify them as well. At the end of the day, neither will on their side. This point ends up being a wash at best. At the very worst case for them, we've proven to you firstly it's easier to find sick people, and why medical treatment of disorders still exists on our side of the house, as well as why there is no false perception of what a medical disorder actually is. There's no false perception of what a clinically depressed person actually is. Lastly, and most importantly from our side, where are social justice movements achieved and where are they bettered? We told you from the beginning of our case that ultimately our society and social justice movements are built on a greater purpose and hope for a better future. Because Martin Luther King had a speech of "I have a dream." He had a dream of a better future in which Black people would not be oppressed. It is built on, no matter how problematic and hard this movement may seem to focus and to achieve in status quo, it will happen at the end of the day, and said hope and light at the exist of the tunnel exist. We've also proven to you why negativity negatively impacts said movements. We've told to you with examples of the Capitol Hill riots, which resulted in nothing but problematic results, because those movements arise purely from hate, anger, and resentment, which is what Laura was talking to you about in his speech. They ask us whether we're planning to reform the whole system of our society that is inherently problematic simply based on hope. We tell you rebellions are built on hope.
I thank David for his reply speech, and we're moving on to the last speech of this debate. I invite the reply speaker for the side of government to wrap this debate for us. Here.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The side of opposition cannot simply claim that people know what happiness is. This is not science as the Laura wanted to present in her speech. This is something that people simply don't understand. If you've never felt happiness before, you're not going to realize what happiness is now. They cannot just simply base their case on people being able to go out and seek happiness and feel it as the final goal, because they're not going to know where they achieved the change. They're going to think that they achieved the change at the point at which they suppressed all of their negative emotions. There are a lot of bad impacts to that. I'll explain that further on. Okay. 4 major things in the speech. Firstly, some clarification on the characterization, then 3 questions on why we win this debate. Firstly, the characterization. On the side of proposition, we tell you that the culture of positivity, the suppression of emotions and being happy with this, and simply being happy with the status quo. It's simply true because we tell you that the suppression of feelings is necessary for the people to know that, for the people to think that they feel happy. But on the side of opposition, they tell you that the blind goal, that the culture of positivity is presenting that the blind goal is to be happy at the end of the day, and they try to explain it with the scientific formula as mentioned earlier. This is simply not true, because you need to know when you're happy, and you cannot know that on their side of the house when you don't deal with the problem and you simply suppress or your feelings down. With that, we tell you that we have multiple mechanisms for people on our side of the house to deal with the problem. We tell you that people are going to find the best solutions, the solutions that feel them, because this is the only option that they actually follow they actually solve the issue. But on their side of the house, they only have this one option because this is an option that is prominent in the society. And because they're forced into that one option, and we show you that this alternative is worse off, we already take this debate. Okay, now 3 major questions. One, on why this is better for the individuals. Firstly, we tell you that for a large majority of people, problems and reasons for being unhappy come from very different situations, from the external factors of being like abused in a workplace to internal factors, having certain chemical imbalances and traumas and so on. The fact is that you have to identify the core of the issue to achieve the final goal, which can vary. It can be happiness, like the side of opposition wanted to present to you, or it can be just simply being passionate about social justice movements and achieving something on that point. But on the side of opposition, the society keeps telling you to be happy, but I don't think that people generally simply don't have problems in life. They simply have like a certain issues that they have to deal with, and for many people, like being unhappy in a workplace is realistic, meaning that on their side of the house, a lot of people are going to be under stress, but they're not going to realize that the workplace is the one that is causing them stress, meaning they're going to blame themselves and put a lot of pressure on dealing with the individual because they're not going to realize that the actual problem is the workplace. They're just going to blame themselves for not being able to be happy because the society keeps telling them to just stay positive. They're not going to realize the problem is in the workplace. They're going to realize that think that the problem is in themselves. Secondly, under this point, about the suppression of the negative emotions. This happens because people stigmatize the negative emotions, meaning they're told to be happy all the time, meaning they're told not to have those negative emotions. And there are a lot of bad things that happen with that. And we told you that there are a lot of harms of suppressing. You're simply less aware of the things that are happening around you, and you're misunderstanding happiness, which is extremely important and why we take this point. Okay, second question then on where we get it better for the society. An extremely important point that the side of proposition brought up to you here is that we tell you that it is better for minorities because we're creating like new points for them to fight for, because we're giving them the emotion that they actually need, allowing them to express themselves with anger and actually achieve those change in the social justice movement. The side of opposition wants to tell you that hope is enough for all of the social justice movement and they should simply focus on hope and deal with that. But we tell you that this is not true because you're not going to recognize the cause of the problem and you're not going to be hopeful about the right things at the point at which you need anger for the social justice movement. Lastly, very briefly on the mental health awareness, and this is an extremely important argument because it is the trend that we regret and not the status quo as the side opposition wants to talk about. It engages with them even on their best grounds when they're telling people simply to stay happy. What we tell you here is that the culture of positivity automatically leads to that there is no reason for exploration on the topic of the mental health and there is no research being done, meaning there is further stigmatized and there is no money being invested into the mental health researchers being developed. This is why I'm proud to propose this motion.
I thank Anna for her reply speech, and I thank everyone for this debate. I think you can all move to the main room, and the decision will be announced there after we submit our ballots. Congratulations to both teams again, and hope you have fun.